Hello po. Magandang araw sa lahat. Ina-upload ko ang bidyong ito upang malaman ng lahat, hindi lang ng ibang sekta at ng lahat ng mga Katoliko. Pero nakikita ko kasi dapat ay tayo magiging susuporta tayo sa mga ginagampanan ng mga CFD dahil katotohanan naman ang kanilang inilalahad. Hindi naman kasinungalingan. Hindi kagaya sa ibang sekta na nagsisinungaling sa panahon ng pakikipagdebate o kaya nagsasabi sila ng mga kwento-kwento tungkol sa kanilang reliyon, sa kanilang sektang o grupong kinaaaniban. Ito, makikita ninyo ang katotohanan. Walang ibang sikta sa panahon ng problema sa Iraq at saka sa Syria, kundi ang Roman Catholic lamang ang andoon. No? Makikita naman natin sa mga sinasabi ng mga lokal na mga tao doon ay century na. Ilang siglo na ang nakalilipas, lalo na yung mga building nila doon, yung simbahan, yung churches nila. Kaya panoorin ninyo at ninyo na ito'y, kasi ang sabi ng mga pastor ay lumalaganap. Hindi nga, wala nga silang doon eh. Wala nga silang church at wala silang member. Lalo na yung mga born again Christian, Baptist, o kaya kung ano-ano pa. Lalo na yung mga bago, Iglesia ni Cristo, wala na man doon sa Iraq. Kaya ito, mapapanood ito ng lahat ng mga sekta na kung saan ngayon ay parang nagmamayabang. Ito makikita natin ito talaga. Hindi kayo lumalaganap, hindi kagaya ng Catholic, ng mga Katoliko ay lumalaganap sa buong daigdig. Kayo ay hindi, no? Na lugar sa buong mundo ang Syria at saka ang Iraq. Pinakamatagal na lugar. Okay, panoorin natin.
Disturbing scene unfolding in Iraq.
More towns fell today to Islamic extremists who launched a massive surprise attack.
The sounds of all-out war.
Islamic extremists known as ISIS have been welcomed by many in Mosul.
If you do not think the way they do, you die.
10 years ago, this city, Mosul, fell to one of the most brutal forces the modern world has ever known, ISIS. For the Christians who had lived here for generations, life would never be the same. They were now faced with three options: to convert, to flee, or to die. We've come back to Iraq to learn more about this incredible story of a community that refused to be destroyed.
Throughout history, Iraq's Christians have endured persecution, war, and displacement. The ISIS invasion marked one of the darkest chapters in this long struggle, but it's a chapter filled with stories of strength and faith. And over the next hour, we'll speak with Christians who lived through it, the survivors, and those dedicated to rebuilding their lives and community.
You know, because you have hope. If you don't have hope, you can't live.
What happened to us was like a world war, or a Hiroshima. Iraq's Hiroshima.
What would have happened if you didn't leave? If you refused to go, if you stayed here?
They were to kill me.
To kill you?
Yes, of course.
I had my mom calling me, telling me, come back home, it's not safe. I had my own feelings of, is this the beginning of the end for Christianity in Iraq?
Really?
Definitely, yes.
But first, let's go back in time. Today, Iraq in the Middle East is known as a Muslim land. But it wasn't always that way.
At oo nga pala, may isang movie na ngayon na animated tungkol sa mga nangyari sa mga Christian dito sa Syria at saka sa Iraq na pinatay talaga sila. Ang The 21. Ang title nito ay Top 21. Alam nyo, pinapili sila ng ISIS. Tatalikuran ba nila ang pagka-Christian nila, being Catholic, o kamatayan? Anong ginawa nila? Pinili nila ang mamatay kaysa talikuran nila ang magiging isang Christian Catholic. Biro mo yan? Ha? Tuloy natin. Panoorin.
Christianity in Iraq dates back almost 2,000 years. The people here cherish their faith. It was an integral part of their culture and their lives. And that faith was handed down from generation to generation through stories, prayers, and ancient texts.
The Saint Bainam and Sarah Syriac Catholic Monastery was a powerful spiritual and cultural site in northern Iraq. Located near the ancient city of Nineveh, it served as a center of Christian worship, scholarship, and pilgrimage for centuries. The monastery's history is rooted in the legend of Mar Bainam, a prince who converted to Christianity along with his sister Sarah, and were martyred for their faith.
Father, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Father Mazen Matoka is the abbot here.
This is incredible, this monastery.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to the 4th century?
Yes. هذا الدير بالفعل.
We can see some of it now, the inscriptions and prayers that ISIS destroyed.
You can see our Father and Holy Mary and some prayers here destroyed it. ISIS. Yes.
This is the Our Father in Arabic that has been
Yes,
destroyed
in
by
Syriac
ISIS.
and in Arabic, two language. Yeah.
Chiseled away.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
The monastery was once a thriving center for the faith, educating priests and monks about Catholicism who would then go out and preach, and the faith spread quickly. Archbishop Basha Warda is the Chaldean Archbishop of Erbil.
One of the characteristics of this church here was a missionary church. Like, yes, it was separated because mainly it was within the Persian Empire, which was separated politically from the Roman Empire. But this church here, although there was a lot of persecution in the beginning of the Christianity here, managed to send missionaries to even the Gulf states.
It was during the 8th century that Islam arrived in Iraq, shortly after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And by the late 8th century, the new religion had firmly established itself in the region, and Iraq became a crucial area in the early development of Islamic civilization, making Baghdad its capital.
Even when Islam came at the end of the 7th century, they welcomed, and they started like a dialogue of life with Islam. The Christians were the one who helped translating philosophical texts, math, medicine, from Greek to Syriac and then to Arabic.
So this idea of interreligious dialogue is not a new concept here. Back then there was this, in some way, religious harmony between the two?
I would say there was a dialogue of life.
While there may have been a dialogue of life, and Muslims didn't necessarily use force to make people convert, there were other social, political, and economic pressures put on Christians. The Islamic conquests introduced new governance systems, which often favoured Muslims with lower taxes and easier movement within the region. And many converted to Islam to gain these advantages or to integrate more fully into the new ruling elite. Additionally, the appeal of Islam's simple and universal message, as well as the influence of Muslim traders, scholars, and intermarriage, contributed to conversions. And while violent and radical expressions of Islam have appeared at various times over the centuries, the significant escalation of radicalism and violence in Iraq can be traced to modern times. The Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, the Gulf War of the 1990s, and then in the 2000s, the US invasion of Iraq, which toppled Saddam Hussein's regime and created a power vacuum. This chaos allowed extremist groups like Al-Qaeda to flourish, eventually leading to the rise of ISIS in the 2010s.
Formed ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham. Now they've taken Mosul, Tikrit and much of central Iraq.
ISIS destroyed it all across it. Any human, look like Saint Behnam, Saint Peter, Saint Paul, destroyed it because لأنه هو يعني أحكيها بالعربي لأنه هو كان يحسب إنه هاي الأشياء هي عبادة.
I'll say it in Arabic. They destroyed these markings because they believe that we worship the cross and that we worship the animals and the saints.
القديس.
And any markers of the Christian faith?
Yes.
They destroyed it, they took it away.
Yeah, certainly.
This monastery housed a rich collection of ancient Syriac Christian manuscripts, including liturgical books, theological writings, and historical records. But when ISIS invaded, they wanted to destroy any symbols of Christianity they could, although some symbols were accidentally spared.
He thinks the Islamic art here and there, but he don't focus. This is the Babylonian or this is the Christian art.
One of the markings ISIS mistook for Islamic art was the octagon, symbolizing the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
This is the octagon, the 8. This is the cross, and this is the first letters Jesus in Greek. The الحياة الجديدة أو الحياة الأبدية.
And it means new life or eternal life. This marking symbolizes the 8th day in Christianity, which means new life or a symbol of eternal life. This was present in the Babylonian civilization, but for us, the 8th day means God's new creation had begun because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
I show you. This, you see this windows?
Yes.
The 8. Same, the octagon.
Inside, more damage. Depictions of saints and holy people were scraped and chiseled off the walls.
In addition to the symbols of the lion, which represents Christ, Saint Sarah, and also here, we have the doors of the 2 baptisms, which have symbols of monks and crosses. Look, we can see a monk and a cross here.
Monks and crosses.
These were all unfortunately destroyed by ISIS. Any cross that was here, even if it was small, was destroyed by ISIS.
ISIS made sure to destroy any markings of Christianity, but interestingly, didn't destroy the building itself.
Father, why didn't ISIS just completely destroy this place? Why did they want to keep it?
When ISIS captured this site, it was also because of a military reason. You see, this place was protected. There are no buildings around us, so it was a good lookout. And also, it's a protected archaeological site, so it could not be bombed or struck by Iraqi military forces. So it was a strategic hideout for them, and they used this place to hide the things they had taken in war. They also held prisoners here and held them trial.
Tapusin natin ito, mga kaibigan, sa panunood upang malaman natin ang katotohanan.
On the outskirts of the city of Mosul, you have towns like Karamels, Bartella, and Karakosh. Families lived here for generations, building lives rooted in faith. Today, these towns bear the scars of the invasion.
These villages were once the heart of Iraq's Christian population, vibrant communities full of life, tradition, and faith. But when ISIS entered, within just a few hours, the residents fled.
ISIS created checkpoints around these towns. They now had control. Christians were stopped and asked to convert. They were threatened, and they were told this was no longer their home. Living at home with her parents and sister is Rand.
Rand, hey, great to see you again.
They are all Christians. Today she is 30, but she was 20 when ISIS invaded her town of Karakosh.
What do you remember of that time? When you were here, life was normal, and then all of a sudden you hear that ISIS is coming.
Well, I remember for the last 3 days we were sleeping on the roof of the houses because...
Sleeping on the roof of the houses?
Yeah.
Why was that?
Because the electricity was cutting off at that time because of all these, attacks between ISIS and the Iraqi army. And then we were sleeping on the roof because it was too hot. You can't sleep inside the house with no electricity.
Because there's no air conditioning.
Yeah, but also we were seeing the rockets between going and coming from the both sides for 3 days, yeah.
Rand's family had become used to living in dangerous situations here in this turbulent area, and before they had stayed put and held their ground. But when the fighting around them intensified, they knew something was different this time.
My dad was thinking that we're just gonna go for a few days just to relax and then we come back. We didn't expect this. At the same day, at the night, we heard the news that ISIS attacked Karakosh and no more under control.
So you realized then you had made it out just in time?
Yeah, it was, a very wise decision.
Now you're just rebuilding bit by bit.
We rebuild.
Also living in the town of Karakosh is Halas Isha. He is a former member of the Iraqi parliament, and his house was destroyed by ISIS and had to be rebuilt.
This is my house, and like other houses in this area, it was totally burned.
Destroyed?
Yes, I had a library containing thousands of books. They were all burned as well. I have some pictures here of what the house was like.
Just burned.
Burned?
It was burned, all of it.
What did you think when you saw your house burned?
Okay, I thank God because my family was saved. That was the
most important
thing for me.
Thank God.
Halas has a deep knowledge of Iraq and its social and political structures, and says that while the rapid fall of the Iraqi forces to ISIS came as a surprise, he believes the attacks were inevitable, as spots of violence and terror had been increasing before that.
When the previous regime fell in 2003, it created a vacuum. A security vacuum, a political vacuum, a social vacuum, and a religious vacuum. Everything was different. Because before that, there was only one system of power in the country, but all of a sudden, this flipped and the system changed. And so because of this, extremists were able to enter the region and take advantage of that vacuum. They used it to create chaos in society. They promoted a backward mentality, and they took things back 1,400 years as if life had just begun. They completely disregarded the modern sense of coexistence and all other developments that had taken place in the communities.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
After the fall of Saddam Hussein's Sunni-dominated regime in 2023, Iraq's government became predominantly Shia. This created tensions in Sunni-majority areas, where some felt politically and socially marginalized. Extremist groups like ISIS capitalized on this discontent, seeking power and enforcing a radical form of Sunni Islam. While some Sunni Iraqis initially sympathized with ISIS's anti-government stance, many others rejected their ideology and became victims of their violence.
This created confusion in the community and led to the emergence of extremists who sought to disrupt the country's security and cause division in society. So these groups launched several acts against other sects or faiths, especially those who disagreed with their ideologies and mindset.
ISIS used their ideology and their interpretation of Islam to justify a brutal killing spree, showing very little mercy.
In the beginning, people were murdered simply according to their identity cards. There was once an occasion where 8 students were kidnapped from Baghdad, Qaraqosh, as they were in the school buses. And these buses were sponsored by the church at the time. On another occasion in 2010, students were attacked as they were heading for their morning classes in Mosul. There were about 1,200 students, and there was a trap set up for them to be murdered. Thankfully, it was foiled. There were many groups being targeted in Mosul and in the Sunni areas, even in Baghdad. And from 2003 until the ISIS conflict in 2014, 1,132 Christians were killed.
Even before the ISIS invasion, many Christians and other minorities had moved to areas like the Nineveh Plains to try and feel stronger in numbers, because back where they came from, they didn't feel safe. When attacks happened, they felt they weren't being defended, and that even their ordinary Muslim neighbors were turning a blind eye to the persecution.
Did a certain percentage of the population in places like Mosul accept ISIS when they came in because their beliefs aligned with their ideology?
Yes, before ISIS attacked, there was some instability in the relationship between the civilians and the security forces. The civilians thought that most security forces were Shia Muslims, and the city of Mosul and the surrounding villages were mostly Sunni Muslims. So there was some sectarianism that was rising there. But it seems like there was no strong leadership among the Iraqi military forces at that time to resist and stop the invasion of Mosul. So when the Iraqi forces retreated, all the weapons and tanks were left in the hands of the opposing group.
So they took those weapons and they became stronger.
They became stronger.
With the retreat of the Iraqi forces and their arms being put into the hands of the terrorists, emboldened by a new sense of power and control, and again complicit support from many of the locals, ISIS were now stronger than ever.
Oh, I mean, they have to leave Christianity. They should become a Muslim. That's the first condition. Or paying the taxation, the jizya, which is kind of enslavement. I mean, you cannot really think. If we have accepted this in the 7th, 8th century and 9th century, but you cannot accept it in the 21st century.
If Christians didn't convert, they would have to pay an enormous tax, money that would have been used to further strengthen ISIS and their mission, the same method used to persecute Christians hundreds of years ago. And if they refused to do that,
they could be facing death. That's easy. If he refused to become a Muslim or paying the jizya, he would be, beaten and could face the death.
It must have been terrifying for the people in that situation at the time, like a nightmare.
It is a nightmare just to think about it. Plus, who would be supporting you if you don't have a community, a Christian community around us?
When ISIS approached Karakosh, everyone fled, but Halas remained there until the last moment, clinging to the chance that they might be defeated.
What would have happened if you didn't leave? If you refused to go, if you stayed here?
Tapusin natin
They were
mga
to kill
kaibigan
me.
sa panunood.
To kill you? Yes, of course.
They murdered anyone working for the government or for the state without considering their type of work.
The fall of Karakosh was one of the most devastating moments for Iraqis Christians. Families were torn apart and some even paid the ultimate price.
Archbishop Benedictus Yonan Hanno is the Syriac Catholic Archbishop of Mosul and remembers the mass exodus of people starting to flee when ISIS came, having nowhere to go, and even worse, as Christians, feeling like they had no one to turn to.
Everyone was experiencing a state of chaos and horror until the late hours of that night. The situation was chaotic, confusing, and it was painful, filled with suffering, as we had to leave our homes and our churches. The most painful thing we experienced on that day, something that's hard to get over, was the disappointment we felt when there was no one there to defend or protect us. We realized just how marginalized we are in this country. And at the same time, it's so difficult for someone to be lost and fleeing in their own country without protection. So this was one of the things that caused us real pain, to have become refugees in our own lands, losing our identities. We were no longer identified according to our backgrounds and origins. Rather, we were only identified as refugees. And this was a painful word for us.
The people felt a sense of betrayal. Many believed there wasn't a huge effort put into protecting them as they were Christians.
This was painful for Christians because at that point we felt rejected in these areas. And so for all these reasons, the people were let down by the rulers and by the present forces.
But it wasn't just Christians who were targeted, it was also other minorities.
When ISIS entered Nineveh, they harmed all the groups living in the areas, and not only Christians, but they also targeted Muslims, Yazidis, and other groups as well, such as Kakais, Shabak, and Turkmen. They were all persecuted. Everyone was in danger. ISIS's danger did not only target Christians, but it targeted the whole of Iraq, everybody.
The reason that extremist groups like ISIS form is complex. However, it has been shown that the group leaders recruit by appealing to young men's insecurities and vulnerabilities in the system.
ISIS was able to manipulate very poor and marginalized groups within Iraqi society. People who had little to no income or education and were vulnerable to extremist ideology. So this idea of ISIS recruiting from these groups was not a new approach in Iraqi society, because this was the very same approach adopted previously by Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was also looking for unemployed young men, those who did not have a source of income or purpose in life. They would pay them money in order to implement their terrorist operations. And we have heard this from the politicians who were fighting the Al-Qaeda ideology at that time.
Archbishop Benedictus believes that the Iraqi government shares some of the responsibility for allowing these young men to become so radicalized.
I think the Iraqi government could be criticized here, because it did not provide industrial facilities that could have potentially provided employment opportunities for the young population, allowing them to work for the government, and granting them a good source of income. When ISIS came in, it was a transitional period for the government. So there were many factors that had combined together, and ISIS exploited this gap that the Iraqi community was having, namely the unemployment of the people. Indeed, this is not an excuse for those who betrayed their country, but at the same time, the Iraqi government was unable to meet citizens' needs at that time. And that's why ISIS exploited this gap, and the consequences were very tragic.
وعملت هذه العمائل المأساوية جدا.
With thousands of Christians on the run and nowhere to go, not knowing when they could return home and fearing for their lives, they turned to the one place they knew would not desert them, the church. And one of the places they came in the middle of the night was to the church here in Erbil. Archbishop Warda remembers the scene of chaos when he entered the churchyard.
All of these families, scattered inside the church building, the gardens, here, everywhere around this house. They refused to go to the UN camps. They said the church is the secure place that we could really rely on.
What was also extraordinary was that even though there was no guarantee that ISIS wouldn't come here next, many young Christians decided to stay and help these strangers. Two of those Christian volunteers were Divar Sher and Alan Rassam.
You were both here 10 years ago when this courtyard was filled with people, with families who had fled. What do you remember about the feeling that was in the air, what it was like?
It was very mixed feelings. I remember the first time that we heard about the news, the first feeling every Christian here, not only every Christian, but every citizen of Erbil was like, we need to flee Erbil because ISIS is coming to Erbil.
You thought they would come here too?
Yes, everyone thought that. You were seeing the borders were filled with people kind of going to the mountains because they were thinking that it's harder to reach the mountains. We came with our cars and we kept transferring people from the church from 8 p.m. probably until 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and people just kept coming and coming. It was scary. I had my mom calling me, telling me, come back home, it's not safe. I had my own feelings of, is this the beginning of the end for Christianity in Iraq?
Really?
Definitely, yes.
And feeling that danger and uncertainty, why did you decide to come here and to help?
From the beginning, we were part of the church, this community. I mean, it's part of our mission, but it's also a humanitarian feelings and a humanitarian response to those of our own. Many of these families, they were moving on feet from dozens of kilometers because ISIS took their car and they were lucky to be alive.
The young volunteers got to work, distributing food, blankets, medicine, but it was overwhelming.
We basically were there to distribute the breads, the whatever that was being cooked, some of the sandwiches, some of the people who came and kind of gave water, hygienic stuff, baby stuff, anything that was given, we were basically distributing it. And then after the first week, me and a couple of other friends in the medical background, we also thought that there's a need for medicine for these people.
While the young volunteers looked after people's immediate physical and material needs, Bishop Warda remembers the spiritual turmoil and confusion among the community that he had to try and help and be there for the people.
Why God all of this? What we've done? What was our sin? Why we've been punished this way? We are innocent. Even for me and for other bishops. Why? Why us in this situation?
What do you think gave people the strength to keep going and to stand by their faith and to live having fled away from their home? What gave them the courage to keep going?
I would look at this from being a member of the body of Christ. Even if some people would say, yeah, okay, not all of them have a personal faith in Christ. Okay, but they do have personal trust in you and me who have personal. So we move as a community, body of Christ, and walk as a body of Christ. And from that, we get that strength. It's a community faith. It's a we faith in that sense. With, of course, thinking always that we are Church of the Martyrs. Just speaking of the modern history of Iraq, we never had 10 years in peace.
They say that in the worst of times, you can see the best in people. And you did get to see that with all the volunteers and the work that you were doing.
It really was a nice feeling to see that we were like, there were at least, on every day, there was like at least 80 to 90 volunteers from different ages, starting from 15 and 16 years old until 30 and 40, coming together to do, and it was, the natural distribution of tasks just happened. For example, whoever who liked to help children and kind of keep them entertained,
they did that.
They did that. Whoever who was
like to
good
cook,
with, exactly.
They did that.
I feel honored that I served with these people at that time. I feel honored that I served with Bishop Warda, who was the first one to welcome these IDPs, but also he was the one to cook for them. We had a very big pot, and there's pictures about how he was cooking and pouring for each family or each person who was coming to take the food.
It gives you hope, doesn't it, Alan, when you see that spirit come out in people?
Yeah, it's about the leadership that we had. That's something that will give you hope that when the government is not there, the bishop was there.
The sad reality is that for all the ones who stayed and sought shelter, many others simply couldn't cope. The damage had been done. They saw ISIS had destroyed their homes and their communities. There was nothing to return to, and they left their beloved homeland of Iraq.
57% of the people immigrated to Australia, Canada, Europe, and the USA.
America. 57% of our people were out now.
In addition to that, over 83 churches, graveyards, and monasteries were destroyed, and this was just in Nineveh. This almost destroyed the Christian heritage and culture, and the museums that held the roots of our civilization as Chaldeans, Syriacs, and Assyrians. This was our background, our history, and we felt a great deal of pain when our cultural heritage was destroyed. They even killed our religious leaders. They were also digging up the graves, especially those of clergymen in Karamlish, and taking the bodies out of graves and doing very horrific things.
There will be no Christians in Iraq, there will be no Assyrians in Iraq.
What Rand and her family, Khalis, the priests and bishops thought would last only 3 days, lasted 3 long years. But eventually, ISIS were defeated.
When the government strengthened its power and efforts in fighting ISIS, we could see that all components of Iraqi society were ready to contribute to the liberation of the occupied areas. And they contributed to the fight against ISIS. Hence the reason we see various religious groups within the security forces today. Because ISIS was against humanity, against Iraq, and against the people and civilization.
The city was meant to be the pride of the so-called Islamic State. But now, their hold on Raqqa is about to end.
Slowly and nervously, people started to return to the towns and villages they once called home.
I came back here after 3 years, more than 3 years I came here. The first one who came to this house from my family was me, to see the house, to see all the town, and it was miserable. When I entered the house, I had, like, it still come to my mind, all these feelings. And once I entered the house, I couldn't enter everything because they thought maybe it has some mines or something, you know.
Really?
Yeah, so I only entered here in this room. And I saw some ISIS books and the birds and all this information, notebooks.
How did you feel when you come into your family home?
For me, I couldn't used to stay here. I was struggling every day, crying, asking my dad, let's go back to Erbil, it's better for our mental health, or, I can't feel home anymore.
So why did you decide to stay back home?
This is our land, and this is where we belong, and this is where we need to stay and work and develop for ourselves and for the community here. And always to remind people that this Iraq was our home since many, many centuries ago, and always remind people that this is where we belong.
Another one of those villages where people were coming back to is Tel Kaif, where Hala Amir lives. This used to be a strong Christian community, but after the invasion, most of the Christians never returned. Hala and her family are now in the Christian minority.
The majority of the population here consists of Muslims. There are only 50 Christian families who returned after the occupation of ISIS. The rest are all Muslims.
What is it like being a Christian in this community?
Of course, I faced many difficulties after returning. Before ISIS, there were many Christians here, but after we returned, the Christian population diminished. For example, I do not have many friends here. I often go to Batnaya or Teleskuf. At school, I was the only Christian here, which is why I wasn't able to engage with others. And here, we cannot even really dress as we wish. So there are many difficulties that we face, but we thank God for everything.
Hala now feels the same as so many others, the pressure of being a minority or being different in your own land.
The pressure and the oppression of being a minority, you could feel it. I mean,
still today?
Yeah, we are like less than 250,000 in a country of over 40 million people.
Rodi Sher is the interim editor-in-chief of EWTN's partner agency, Asimina. He is based in the city of Erbil and has been covering stories of the lives of Christians here in the region.
So many people think that Christians are being treated as second-class citizens. Well, this was for a while, and even we might see it now from time to time, but the situation is way better if we compare to what happened in 2003, later on in 2010, and recently in 2014. But as for today, things have changed a lot. People are being treated better, maybe holding better positions, and we can never compare the Christians who are living in Islamic societies to the one who live in Europe and USA. But what I can say, it's better for now, and we hope that it will continue to be good.
Rodi was the producer on this assignment, with us as we filmed for a week in Kurdistan in Iraq. And he said, we witnessed little examples here and there of how Christians are treated. For example, when we were filming with Hala in her village of Tel Kaif, a group of children came around us to play, when one of them said in Arabic that they wouldn't play with another little girl because she was Christian.
The most important thing I believe that should be changed is the mentality. I mean, the education, the mentality, the belief of people about the Christians. Even if you recall when we were shooting at some of the locations in Mosul, some of the kids approached us and they were talking about other Christian kids, and they say we don't play with them because they're Christians. The community here needs to be educated, and the education should be imposed on people, because the ignorance is one of the weapons that will destroy societies. If the kids are being, taught at school that
because they're being told you can't play with Christian children.
Yeah, it should be right opposite. We are all citizens of Iraq, and we should be treated equally. But today, I mean, I think the new generation has started to realize this. There is difference. We can see the difference that people have started to accept the other who is different from them. And this is very important for us.
Hala, what does your faith mean to you? What does it mean to be an Iraqi Christian?
Being an Iraqi Christian definitely means a lot to me. For Christ said, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the candles that are present here." So we Christians are like candles in Iraq, and our goal is to illuminate the darkness here.
The Pope's visit to Iraq in 2021 was seen as a historic trip, Pope Francis being the first Pope in history to make the journey. It was seen as a joyous moment for the country and its people, and something that helped change that negative perception of Christians in the country, even if for a while.
The trip definitely highlighted the country, especially for the minorities in Iraq. It emphasized the difficulties faced by these groups in the country. This allowed civil society organizations and similar institutions to emphasize the Christian presence here. We became more visible.
I remember at the time we were talking, doing an interview, and you told me that while the visit of Pope Francis is a wonderful thing, you weren't sure what effect it would have long term for Christians in Iraq, how much of a difference it would actually make. Do you think it has made any difference?
Well, regarding the visit, in the beginning we did not notice the impacts or results of it, but after a few years we started to see the effects of the Pope's visit to Iraq, as the country allowed Christians to have state positions, and organizations came to their aid, helping them rebuild and supporting the return of refugees.
What a historic trip it has been for Pope Francis.
When I traveled to Iraq with the Pope in 2021, covering the trip for EWTN, one of the most powerful moments was when Pope Francis stood in the middle of Mosul, surrounded by the rubble and ruins left by ISIS. He stood in silence, remembering all those who had experienced that terror. Father Rahid Emmanuel, head of the Syriac Catholic churches in Mosul, was one of the main organizers of that trip.
No pope has ever visited this city before, but this pope did come here, and he was very brave to do so. He wanted to visit this city where, in fact, the thing that happened to us was like a world war, or a Hiroshima, Iraq's Hiroshima. It was a place of torture, flagellation, murder. All of this happened after ISIS occupied the place. But the Pope visited this place to say that we are peacemakers, we establish peace, and we are against murder and terrorism. And the Pope truly delivered this message. Today, the city that was once a city of ruins and destruction has started to recover and is being rebuilt. It is being reconstructed, and much of this reconstruction and restoration is happening due to the Pope's visit.
While in Iraq, one of the places Pope Francis visited was the Church of the Immaculate Conception in Karakosh. Inside, he asked the people to rebuild their communities based on forgiveness and fraternity.
When the Pope visited Iraq in 2021, he really emphasized interreligious dialogue. He asked for harmony, for people to understand the concept of we are all brothers. Has that had an impression, a lasting impression here in the country?
Yes and no. I would say the crisis and the disputes, political disputes, and the lack of trust among all of the Iraqi political parties is really a deep wound, still bleeding. We know the hatred, the lack of trust, all of these memories is still there.
Cardinal Louis Raphael Sacco is the head of the Chaldean Catholic Church in Iraq. He was there with Pope Francis when he went to meet one of the most respected scholars of the Shia Muslims, the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani.
The visit of the Pope touched a lot, the culture, the impression of many Muslims, about Christians and Christianity. Now they know that Christianity is a religion of peace, and we are helping all persons in need, and we welcome them. I think the visit gave a big hope to all Iraqis, because during 3 days there was nothing.
No trouble.
No weapons, no attacks. Everybody was looking and following the visit with joy and peace.
EWTN had filmed with Hala Amir 4 years ago when Pope Francis came to visit, and back then she told me about her wish to push forward and be successful in life.
The last time we spoke, you told me your ambition was to finish dental school, become a dentist. How are you doing at the moment?
I am very proud of myself and happy to have accomplished my dream of becoming a dentist. I recently graduated from the College of Dentistry at the University of Mosul, and hopefully by next year I will be a practicing dentist, able to contribute to building a better society.
And I remember that you loved to sing, and you loved poetry, you loved everything creative.
Yes, I love poetry for sure. I'm always at church and I am a member of the choir, so I always chant Christian hymns. And sometimes I sing in festivals, and this is a hobby that I love.
You're a good singer.
Yeah, I'm good.
Hala, what's your dream for the future?
Our wish as Iraqis is to have safety and stability. This is our first wish. And for my personal wishes, I want to continue my studies and later teach at the University of Mosul. Right now, this is my only wish.
And as a young person, Hala, do you ever think of migrating, of leaving your town, leaving your community, maybe even leaving Iraq?
No, we plan to remain here, holding on to our roots as Christians and Chaldeans in Iraq.
You want to stay?
Yeah, I want to stay. I love Iraq.
When your community was attacked here and your house was set on fire, did you think that was the end of your home? Did you think that you would be coming back again someday?
Giorgio says in his novel, The 25th Hour, that hope is a plant that grows even on tombstones. So as Christians, we have hope.
Are there any traces of ISIS left today in Iraq?
Well, there are still some cells, and we do hear of attacks here and there, but they are not that strong. I think if they do not receive external support, maybe from other countries, they will not be able to do anything else. You see, peace must start internally first, especially for our leaders. They must love Iraq. The language of peace must prevail rather than that of prejudice and of discrimination.
Although there is peace here in Iraq at the moment, with political instability and deeply held religious beliefs in certain areas, the feeling you get from Christians is one of thankfulness, but also worry. Will this happen again? And if it does, will we have protection?
As you know very well, there is no stability. I mean, people, not only Christians, but even others, they don't trust the future to stay and to hope. that the future will be better because of the confusion and also the conflicts.
And what gives you hope for the future? For the people of Kurdistan, the people of Iraq, for the church here, what gives you hope for the future?
I hope, Iraq should be a strong state based on human rights and justice and equality and a real citizenship, not sectarian and not first-class citizen, second class.
Many left their homeland, fled as refugees to places like the United States, Europe, and other parts of the world. For them, now with families, the safety and stability in other places is something they can't give up, despite how much they may miss their homeland. But for those who did stay, they continue to move forward.
There is sometimes it comes like you feel you're weak, you don't know what you're doing with this life and what's the purpose of your existence here, but now we know. God give the hardest battles to the strongest warriors, no?
At the monastery of Marbehim, a number of the most valuable manuscripts were saved because of the brave work of a few monks who hid them behind a wall, protecting an entire cultural legacy hidden away in the hope that one day this community would return to reclaim its heritage.
The testimony we must give our people is that we are the children of life, the children of joy, the children of resurrection. And even despite the destruction that occurred, we thank God that, until now, this monastery is still visible to the eye.
What are your dreams for the future of Iraq?
A thriving country, a peaceful country, a country that really have the chance and the possibility of every family to live in peace, prosperity, and to really enrich by the diversity that we have, especially for us as a Christian, always being a thriving community. But that's not just a hope that we wish, but a hope that we would work for as well.
In the land where civilization began, Iraqi Christians, despite all the persecution and the pain, the suffering and the deep sorrow, they're writing a new story, a new song. And as you've seen and you've heard, it's one about courage and perseverance, an incredible testament to the strength of their faith. Until next time, thank you so much for watching and good night from Iraq.